At first glance, Sonos will have you believe that there is no difference between the Sonos Sub Gen 2 and the Sonos Sub Gen 3 here. I can list down 12 differences. Some you already knew, some you would never have figured it out. Right away, I will share one big shocking difference which surprised me. Sonos says that the subs are the exact same weight, but they are not. The Sonos Sub Gen 3 is supposed to weigh exactly the same as the Sub Gen 2, and Sonos listed it at 16 kg, or about 36 pounds. But holding the Sub Gen 2 on one hand and the Sub Gen 3 on the other, you can clearly tell that the weight is different. Surprised? Watch on to find out more. I've done an earlier video comparing the Sub Gen 3 with the Sub Gen 2. That was a quick video to illustrate differences and similarities. And I've also included a recorded sound demo of the two for comparison. Now, since then, I've had the chance to play around much more with the Sub Gen 3 and conducted a lot more testing. In a subsequent test, we went into more technical details like what is the maximum power draw and the sub only frequency response curve and the cone travel of the sub. As of today, I've lived with the Sonos Sub Gen 3 for about a month now, and I'm quite ready to conclude all the differences between the Sonos Sub Gen 2 and the Sonos Sub Gen 3. This will be the final episode for the new Sonos Sub Gen 3 from Sonos. And I will also be sharing for each of these points whether it should impact your buying decision and why. I've most of these points covered over several videos, but this final video on the Sonos Sub Gen 3 should serve to document all the differences and finally my buy conclusion for the Sonos Sub Gen 3. If you want to share any video on the Sonos Sub Gen 3, this will be the final video to share. If anyone needs more details, do check out the other detailed videos which I've compiled into a playlist on my channel for the Sonos Sub Gen 3. The differences are all listed here up front for you if you don't have the time to stick around and listen to me talk them through. They are no felt stickers, refresh joint button, LED light now pauses, upgraded CPU and memory, upgraded Wi-Fi connectivity, refreshed power cable, redesigned speaker cones, thinner rubber surrounds, lighter weight, lower idle power draw, higher power draw at full load, and a flatter frequency response curve. So there you have it. The first 6 changes are small changes and some are design changes which doesn't affect the sub's performance in any meaningful way as of today in the month of July 2020. Now there could be some updates down the road when Sonos decides that only the more powerful CPU and larger memory is capable of supporting. And so the Sub Gen 3 gets the updated feature but not the Gen 2. As of now, every function that is available for the Gen 3 is also available for the Gen 2. The next 6 changes are the ones that aren't readily noticeable, and Sonos never really announced them at all. But because I go quite deep into my wireless audio product reviews, I uncover all this stuff. So if such depth of reviews matter to you, I'd like you to consider subscribing to my channel so that you can get more such reviews. I'll cover each of the changes in detail from here. So, the Sub Gen 2 came with felt stickers that encourages you to lay the sub horizontally on the side. I've tested in one of my videos that the sub actually generates the highest output when it's laid down horizontally. Now, provided there's actually enough clearance above the sub for it to breathe. I'm linking the video right here, and if you are interested in finding out how to position your sub, do check that out. For the Sonos Sub Gen 3, they decide that the felt stickers to place at the bottom of your sub is adding to the cost, and so they have decided to leave it out. When I first got the sub, I checked the entire box through and through, and I couldn't find the felt stickers to stick to the bottom of the sub. I didn't think that Sonos cheaped out on this, and I thought maybe it's just been displaced or they forgot to shove it into the box. I checked in with the local distributor and realized that they didn't know either. But after some investigation work, I then realized that the sub no longer ships with the felt stickers. Well, for the felt stickers, that shouldn't really factor into your buying decision. You can always buy third-party ones like this, which I'm using. The join button has also been refreshed, and the shape is no longer squarish like it is on the Sub Gen 2. It is slightly indented, and now the design, it lines up with the rest of the newer Sonos speakers. This one looks like the older Sonos Play 1. This one looks like the newer, maybe even the Sonos M or the Sonos Pod. They have this rounder button. Now, it feels like it should last a bit longer, and the clicking is a little bit more tactile, and this is a bit softer, but otherwise, you shouldn't notice much other differences. If you are getting pleasure from just clicking the button, I think you've got other problems. So this shouldn't factor into your buying decision between the Gen 2 and the Gen 3. Now, next to this, there is an LED light. Now, when it's lit, the LED light on the Sub Gen 2, it actually comes on and it goes off, right? 0, 100, 0, 100, nothing in between. The new LED light, it pauses. It fades in and it fades out, like a good PowerPoint transition. But I hope that no one is deriving pleasure from this change either. If you need to see these pausing lights and need it to fall asleep, may I recommend buying a 24-port network switch and leaving it on in your bedroom. That LED light should not factor into your buying decision. Now, with regards to the upgraded CPU and memory, I've given up trying to decipher the exact specification that Sonos is putting into these guys. First, I've seen conflicting information, and second, even today, I see it posted differently on the Sonos main site and on the Singapore distributor's site. I would have hounded this detail to death, but right now, as it stands, it doesn't make a scratch of a difference. Everything that the Gen 3 can do, the Gen 2 with the lower spec CPU and less memory can do as well. So yes, the Gen 3 has upgraded specs, but no, it does not make a difference at all and should not factor into your buying decision today. In 5 years' time, my answer will probably change, but today, the Gen 2 that you buy will last you for another good couple of years. And for the upgraded Wi-Fi, now this is interesting. When I first read this, I thought that Sonos was finally going to move into at least Wi-Fi 5 territory. After all, the world is already slowly migrating to Wi-Fi 6 and enjoying close to wired speed. But no, the Sub Gen 3 is still connecting at 54 Mbps, which means to say it's not even Wi-Fi 5, it's not even Wi-Fi 4. Yes, it is still at Wi-Fi 3. For those of you who are used to the older naming convention, that will be 802.11g. Yes, the standard that was ratified in the year 2003. Just 3 years shy of 2 decades. That's it. I've never had a problem with the Wi-Fi connectivity in my house with Sonos speakers before. But then again, I do plug at least one Sonos device into the physical LAN port, and from there, Sonos sets up its own mesh network. So if you're having issues with connectivity, just try to plug at least one of your Sonos devices into a physical network, and it might just solve all your problems. So the Sub Gen 3 has an upgraded Wi-Fi connection, but I don't know how much of a difference it actually makes since it's still stuck at Wi-Fi 3 territory. Doesn't mean that it's not a good thing. It is a strong and stable signal. I actually have a pair of AA Phantom reactors, and they're running on Wi-Fi 5 networks, being AC capable. But they do drop out and they do lose sync sometimes. So no, the Wi-Fi 3 should not factor into your buying decision. Now, if you take a look at what is below this guy, right, you will see that the power cable, the inlet, is different. The C7 connector end of this is different from the older one. If you look at this here, it uses the O plug, which is slightly longish and semi-oval, right? And when you plug in, the plug actually sits all the way in. It's very nice. See, this is heavier. And for this guy, it uses the round end of the plug. Well, the circular flange actually then works with your Sonos M, with the rest of the new, including the new Sonos 5s. So, unless you are swapping cables around the Sub Gen 3 and the Sonos 5 and the Sonos M, or even the Beam, which there's really no reason for you to do so, I would say that this change in the power plug should not factor into your buying decision. So at this point, we have uncovered about half the changes, but that's the half that has absolutely no bearings on the performance of the sub. Some of these are purely cosmetic and makes no difference as of today. And all the first 6 I have recommended that you do not consider when you're choosing to buy either the Gen 3 or the Gen 2. Now the next 6 changes are what I consider to be major changes. If you take a closer look at the Sub Gen 3, you will notice that the cone shape is more aggressively shaped and the dish has a much deeper concave design to the dish. I'm not saying that this is an upgrade or a downgrade, or it's just that it is different. Technically, the more deeply shaped the dish is, the more surface area it has, and should technically allow it to move more air for more base impact. Now I've done the measurement for the cones. The actual cone surface area, which is the rigid part of the cone, excluding the rubber surround, is of the same size between the Gen 2 and the Gen 3. It is deeper, but the two-dimensional size, the height and the width, is exactly the same. The next cone measurement I did was to measure the excursion of the cone, and that's how much the cone moves in and out with the base notes. The exact travel for both the subs are the same at 1.5 centimeters. So no difference there, even with the redesigned speaker cones. And since there's no difference here, in theory, it should not factor into your buying decision. Yes, the Sub Gen 3 has a redesigned rubber surround too. It looks like it is now thinner and not as beefy as before, as in the Sub Gen 2. The Sub Gen 2 had a ribbed design for the rubber surrounds, and it looks a lot thicker surrounding the cone. So technically, a thicker rubber surround allows for greater movement of the cone, and it will allow the sub to work hard and for longer. In the long run, the longevity of the subwoofer comes down to the reliability of the amp as well as the rubber surround of the drivers. A thinner surround on the Sub Gen 3 doesn't bode well in that aspect, but only time will tell. So after talking about how the cone design and the rubber surround can possibly affect the driver's stroke and travel, we realized that the cone travel measurements are exactly the same at 1.5 centimeters for both the subs anyway. So no gain, no loss, and in terms of driver performance, it looks to be similar at the design level, and at least on paper and in theory. Now again, I have to say, for this factor alone, it should not be a major consideration in your buying decision. The Sonos Sub Gen 3 is listed as 16 kg on the Sonos website, and that's the exact same weight as listed for the Sonos Sub Gen 2. Now this means they are of the exact same weight, but they are not. And I'm not talking about tens of grams of difference. I'm talking about 2 kg difference. And in pounds, that's 3.5 pounds difference in weight. Now when you have both the Gen 2 and the Gen 3 holding one in each arm, you will actually feel that there is a significant difference in weight. The Gen 3 is quite a bit lighter. There are 3 components that makes up the bulk of the subwoofer: the enclosure, the amplifier, and the woofer or the driver itself. A heavier enclosure means that there is less resonance and vibration. A heavier amp means it's capable of more power. A heavier cone, or the magnet rather, means it has a stronger magnet, and that could move the cone in a more authoritative manner. But with the Sonos Sub Gen 3 losing significant weight, I don't know if it's going to help the sub perform better. But before we go into the performance differences, we will just leave it as that. The Sub Gen 3 is pounds lighter than the Sub Gen 2, and no one likes a lighter subwoofer. But the question today is not why the Sonos Sub Gen 3 is coming in lighter. The question is, why would Sonos not tell us that it is lighter? In fact, worse than not telling us the weight, it is telling us the wrong weight. Well, that aside, the lighter weight shouldn't factor into the buying decision in any big way. If you listen on, I will explain why. The Sub Gen 3 draws about 3.2 to 3.3 watts in either mode, and that is more efficient than the Gen 2. The Gen 2 draws about 3.8 to 3.9 watts in either mode. The difference is actually small, and if you work out the power draw, it is about 15 watt hours in a day, or about half a kilowatt hour in a month. In a year, it works out to 6 kilowatt hour. Now, assuming you leave it on 24 hours a day, and in most cases, for most parts of the world, this probably costs you less than $1 for the whole year. If you really want to save power, then you might do better turning it off when it's not in use. unless you also listen to your music when you're sleeping and you need bass in your dreams. Now, there will be either times in the day that you can shut it down too. So if the price difference between the Sub Gen 2 and the Gen 3 is $100, it'll take about 100 years for you to recover the difference based on the idle power draw. Now that's assuming that you leave both on for the next 100 years, 24 hours a day. So no, don't factor this into your buying decision. Now what is going to be more interesting is the power draw of the Sonos Sub Gen 3 at full load, not idle load. Now I've done the power draw test for the Sub Gen 2 here, and it was topping out at 275 watts at full load. It is not a very scientific method, but Sonos doesn't reveal the specifications, so I've devised my own way of measuring it. Today, given that the Sonos Sub Gen 3 is already lighter and the cones are shaped differently with a different design for the surrounds, does it actually mean that the power draw will change? Well, surprisingly, the end draw for the Sonos Sub Gen 3 is actually higher. It tops up at 299 watts, and that's almost a good 9% higher than the Sub Gen 2. Yes, we already know that the idle power draw for the Gen 3 is lower, probably pointing to more efficient circuitry, but the extra power headroom is really appreciated in the Sonos Sub Gen 3. So even if it's lighter, it is actually putting out more power. All the points that we've touched on so far, I've recommended that you won't have to consider them when deciding whether to buy the Gen 2 or the Gen 3. Now at this point, on the power draw, this seems to be the first point where I'm going to suggest that you possibly lend some weight to the buying decision. Everyone wants a more powerful amp, especially for subwoofers, but you have to bear in mind that this is instantaneous power draw, and the sampling that for my test is about 0.5 seconds apart. There's a chance that the Sub Gen 2 is also putting out higher power draw, but just not being sampled at that point in time. But then again, I've actually seen the Sub Gen 3 draw 324 watts, but I did not record that, and it was at a different testing session, so I won't officially use that number. So maybe lend a little weight to the consideration if you are choosing between the Gen 2 and the Gen 3. The Gen 3 seems to be a slightly more powerful performer and draws more power, and more power is good when it comes to sound reproduction, all else being equal. And it does seem that quite a lot of things are equal at this point in time. Now, if you look at the frequency response curve of the Sonos Sub Gen 3, it is clear that it goes slightly lower and louder at the lower end of the frequency spectrum. The Sub Gen 2 is not too shabby either, maintaining a relatively flatter response, which means that the bass response will sound less artificially bumped up, which is great for music. But one thing to note is that at the crossover frequency, the Sub Gen 3 clearly cuts over to the main speaker and hands over the frequency nicely. The Sub Gen 2 actually carries still quite a bit of sound energy well past the crossover point, and that is not a good thing. Past 100 Hz, any sub-frequencies that is still being generated will mean that it will start drawing attention to the sub itself, and to this end, it is actually quite a bit easier to localize where the Sub Gen 2 is placed, causing pretty uneven bass response in the whole room. You can actually hear where the sub-frequency is coming from. So this is possibly the only reason that I will ask you to consider when choosing between the Sub Gen 2 and the Gen 3. The Gen 3 seems to hit a little bit harder for movies, and the Gen 2 better for music. Well, this is based on reading the frequency response curves. And if you are into movies, you want a much cleaner crossover point. Why? Because placement of sound is quite important for a surround sound stage. If a sub draws attention to itself, it is not a good thing. To summarize, if availability and price difference aren't deciding factors for you, consider your use case. If you are more into music, get the Gen 2 sub and save a few dollars. Or if you are already using a Gen 2 sub, then there's one less reason for you to upgrade. If you are into movies, get the Gen 3 sub. And if you are using a Gen 2 sub now, then there's one more reason for you to upgrade. My personal conclusion to this whole series of reviews for the Sonos Sub Gen 3 is that there is very little appreciable difference for most people. If you want hard-hitting bass in your Sonos setup, go for either subs. Get the Gen 2 if you want to save a bit of money, and get the Gen 3 if you want to future-proof your investment a little bit longer. Seriously, either way, I find no reason for anyone to regret their choice. If any of my one reason listed above gives you a reason to upgrade, you know you have already decided to upgrade anyway, so just go for it. The ultimate test is in the listening. And from what I'm hearing, you are effectively getting the same great subwoofer performance from either the Gen 2 or the Gen 3. And this concludes all the testing that I've been doing for the Sonos Sub Gen 3. 2020 has been quite a year for Sonos. Apart from the COVID-19, which impacts basically everyone out there, they've been rolling out new products like the Sonos Arc and updates to the Sonos Sub Gen 3 and the Sonos Play 5s. In June, I've covered everything about the Sonos Arc. In July, I've covered everything about the Sonos Sub Gen 3. And August is rolling right around the corner and my Sonos 5s are coming in. So in the month of August, expect a slew of videos from me on the Sonos 5s. If you are keen to keep up with these videos, do subscribe to my channel and ring that notification bell so that you can be notified when those new videos drop. I will see you around in my next video.